Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this Let's Meet webinar. My name is Harshada, and I'm finishing up my PhD at the University of Minnesota in Applied Economics, and I work as a graduate research assistant and the local and regional meat processing fellow with Stu Lowry and with Kathy Drager, with Stu Lowry at Minnesota Farmers Union and with Kathy Drager at the U of M Extension. Meat processing, there's been a lot of conversation about meat processing bottlenecks in the supply chain. And that was the motivation to create a meat processing fellow position jointly between the U of M and Farmers Union. And that was also the motivation to get this community together and do these webinars and work in group meetings. So our speaker today is going to be Rebecca Tisselthwaite, who heads the Niche Meat Processors Association Network. She's based in Portland, Oregon. Is that correct? And she has been working in this industry for over 23 years. And we also have with us Josh VanDerPol, who is a very active Minnesota Farmers Union.
Do it after our meeting with Laura tomorrow.
Okay. We also have with us Josh VanDerPol, who is a very active Minnesota Farmers Union member. He's on their governing board, and he's the county president for Chippewa County. And he works on his family farm, which is called Pastures A Plenty. Josh, you can tell more about yourself, but they use holistic raising methods for their animals, and they've done a lot of work in direct marketing to customers also. So we'll start with Rebecca. I'll start by inviting Rebecca to give us like a little overview of the work she has been doing. And then Josh will facilitate a conversation with Rebecca to talk about some of the things that are important to this group.
Great. Thank you, Harshada. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you all today. Again, my name is Rebecca Thistlethwaite, and I'm the director of the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. We are a cooperative extension community of practice made up of practitioners in the niche meat industry. We're housed at Oregon State University, but we serve a national audience. And I don't live in Portland. I live in the Dalles, which is on the Columbia River, about an hour east of Portland. My background does include about 10 years of raising pastured pigs and chickens and scaling that business to about $500,000 annually in sales. So we were, for a short period of time in California with my previous husband, we were the largest pastured organic chicken and pig operation in the state for about 5 years. But I'm not doing that anymore. I'm pretty full-time with my extension work, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we do. So we've been around for 12 years now. And what we try to do is serve the supply chain for niche meats. So everyone from producers to processors through distribution. But we really focus heavily on the processor side of things because there was a gap in the extension world, not really serving that audience previous to the establishment of NPAN. Lots of great livestock extension agents out there and poultry agents, but not a lot who know the world of meat processing. So that's where we come in. We're sort of like an unofficial trade group for small and mid-scale meat processors. And they tell us what they want to learn about every year. We survey them in January, and then we try to create content and programs to serve that audience and to serve their needs. So we put on bi-monthly webinars. We have an extensive YouTube channel with lots of videos, short ones up to long ones. We write case studies. We have a pretty extensive website that we're always adding content to. We do some original research, and then we do a whole heck of a lot of one-on-one consulting and technical assistance. So starting in March of last year, my phone and email started ringing off the hook by mostly farmers frustrated that they couldn't get processing slots and considering opening their own facilities. So for the last 18 plus months, I've also had office hours 3 days a week where I just take phone calls from startups and newbies and people kind of researching and considering opening processing facilities to just ask questions and pick my brain. So that's another big part of what I do. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background around, meat processing issues and bottlenecks, and also how processors would like to work with farmers and how farmers can work better with their processor. And then we'll move to Q&A. So as you guys are all probably acutely aware, since the pandemic hit, scheduling processing slots is, anywhere from 6 to 12 to 24 months out. Pre-COVID, it was very normal, and I don't know about in your region, but it was very normal for processors to be backed up in the fall because everyone wants to kill their animals before winter time, and also the hunted game on top of that. So, it was normal for farmers not to get slots in the fall, but slots usually started to open up again in like January and were a lot more plentiful in the off season. If farmers could figure out how to finish their animals during those other months, they generally could get slots. But now that's no longer the case. And there's certainly a lot of frustrated farmers about that issue, and it's really hard to predict when your animal is going to finish in 18 to 24 months out. And sometimes it's not an option to wait that long, especially with things like pigs, where they're starting to get big and starting to eat you out of house and home, and no longer are profitable anymore once they get too large. So I totally understand those concerns, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the processor side of things. So first and foremost, processors have been busting their butts to try to keep up with this additional demand, but their biggest constraint right now is labor. It's stopping a lot of plants from being able to expand, even though they're making more money than ever. They're just not able to expand. They can't add a second shift. They can't add a Saturday shift. They can't expand their physical plant because they can't get labor. And this issue is ubiquitous across the country. And when we surveyed processors in January, they said that was their number one issue. So I hear you guys are working on a couple things in terms of the labor pipeline and trying to get more skilled butchers. So I think that's great. Hopefully you'll have students actually interested in those programs. So labor is a huge issue. Small processors are raising their wages considerably and offering more benefits and more flexible work schedules, but still they can't get anybody in the door or anyone who comes on a regular basis. I was chatting with a woman who just opened up a new plant in North Dakota in a small town. And I said, how many full-time employees do you have? And she said 10, or excuse me, we have 20 full-time employees, and on any given day, only 10 show up. So that's where we're at, unfortunately. The second probably major issue after labor is access to capital. Meat processing is a low margin business with highly depreciable assets. A lot of facilities aren't even worth anything anymore for collateral because they're so old and depreciated. And so meat processors struggle to get traditional bank financing. That's all about to change, however, and we'll talk about that today a little bit about some of the loan guarantee programs that the USDA is launching, and that'll make it more attractive for banks to lend to processors. And then, normally another major issue is consistent year-round volume. As I was saying, fall is really busy, but the rest of the year, a lot of processors struggle to get enough animals through the door to keep their staff fully employed and to cover their operating expenses. So anything farmers can do to try to bring in animals at other times of the year is really helpful to the processor. And it also means you're more likely to get a slot, right? And I know there's constraints. You guys have winter, and so it's hard to feed animals through the winter, and it can be quite costly. I understand that. The cost to build have skyrocketed. Nowadays, estimates around $400 to $450 a square foot, plus an additional $50 a square foot for equipment. So pretty soon you're looking at $500 a square foot to build. And that's because all the building costs or material costs have gone up, as well as labor costs. And then a lot of people point to regulations as being, the reason why small processors struggle. But when we survey them, that usually comes in fourth or fifth in terms of their list of concerns. But there is some regulatory burden for sure. And probably the main ones that we hear about from processors are the increasing pathogen testing requirements, and they're getting quite complicated for different things. Like there's a lot more E. coli testing for ground beef and salmonella testing for chicken. And then the main issue that gets small plants in trouble is humane handling. Small plants have a much harder time with stunning their animals correctly on the first shot, and it always has to be it's supposed to be one stun and they're done, or one shot and they're done. And if you miss on that first shot, if the animal's still conscious, then you can have your facility shut down. And small plants typically are shut down for longer than large plants. NPAN just wrote a report on this last year about how FSIS works with small plants. And we have a special case study in there about humane handling. And if you read that, you'll see that small plants are typically shut down for an average of 4 to 5 days, and large plants are usually back up and operating in less than a day. And so there's a couple issues behind that. One is that small plants, often the owner operator is also the secretary, is also the food safety specialist, is also the lead slaughterman. I mean, maybe doing everything right. And so for them to get all the paperwork together, sometimes that's a little bit of a struggle. But also, it's pretty clear that FSIS prioritizes getting large plants back up and operating immediately. And they don't necessarily prioritize getting the small plants back up and operating quickly. So there's a disparity there. So those are kind of the main challenges for meat processors. And what meat processors would love to see from their farmers. I know that I used to be a farmer, and I used to do the same thing, but I know farmers like to complain about their processors. They like to say that they're stealing their meat, blah, blah, blah. So I would like to just give you a few words of wisdom on how processors would love to interact with you. First is realize that you guys are in partnership together. Neither one of you will exist without the other. So really think of each other more as a partner, not as it's like getting your hair cut at one salon versus another salon, and you don't really care whoever's the cheapest. Well, your meat processor wants you to be more of a consistent partner, right? Second is consistency. So show up with a number of animals you said you were going to show up with. Ideally be a regular customer rather than just expect to bring all your animals at one time of the year. They'd really love it if you could kind of space it out over the year. They'd really love it if you could bring a full truckload, especially, but if that's not possible, just be a consistent customer and show up with a number of animals you said at the time you said you were going to show up. Provide them clear cutting instructions, and don't expect them to cut each animal or each side of an animal in a different way. They really like, again, consistency, and ideally the whole lot of animals or the whole truckload of animals that you brought in, you have them cut the same way. They don't, it's very high transaction costs and very costly for them to cut all your animals in different ways. And if you need more of that customized cutting, maybe consider going to a custom exempt facility instead, and have your customers go to a custom exempt facility rather than tying up USDA facilities or state inspected facilities with your fancy cutting instructions. Pay on time. And sometimes those bills can be really, really large, especially if you're dealing in truckloads of animals, but your processor is not your lender and you need to pay on time. And occasionally give gratitude and appreciation is always nice. They usually just hear the complaints, but they'd sure love to hear when they get things right also. That goes a long ways. And then if you really are a good customer of a plant and you want them to expand, or you want them to be able to offer smoking or scalding or whatever, consider investing in your favorite plant. I think farmers don't realize that processors are often looking to upgrade equipment and really want to provide good customer service, but again, they don't have great access to capital. And if you are a good regular customer bringing a pretty steady volume, you may consider making an investment in the plant, perhaps becoming a minority owner, or just buying them a piece of equipment that you lease back to them over time, or some other creative arrangement to get them that piece of equipment that you want them to have. I'll just give you a little example. I know a pig farmer in Oregon who was bringing about 250 pigs a year to this processor, which is a pretty decent amount. And he constantly complained that they didn't scald his hogs, and he was selling to restaurants. So he wanted skin on a lot of his cuts. And I said, well, why don't you buy him a hog scalder? And he's like, oh, I never thought of that. So he bought him a hog scalder, and he leased it back to him. And part of their deal was that he got some favorable slaughter slots with the facility over that time that he leased it back to them. So it was like a lease to own situation. And he's like, wow, that worked out really well. So there's a lot of creative ways that you can partner with your processor if you just kind of open your mind up about that. So that's all I have right now. I'll let Stu and Josh ask me some questions.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for coming and spending time with us and sharing your knowledge of the industry. And thank you, Harshada, for lining this all up. I'm Josh VanDerPol. I, together with my family, operate Pastures A Plenty farm in Western Minnesota. And we direct market, we've been direct marketing for about 20 years now, and we direct market about 1,000 head of hogs a year and about 40 head of grass-fed beef. And that's made our farm viable for well, there's 3 generations working on the farm right now. So
Nice.
Get to some questions here. NPAN has been around for over 10 years now, and you've built a great network of practitioners. What are some key insights you have from all the work you've done over the past decade?
That's a great question. We actually wrote like a 10-year report a couple of years ago now. Now we're 12 years old, and gathered input from all of our stakeholders about kind of what we were doing well and where we could improve upon. And a couple of things came out. One is that there's a real there's a gap there's such a huge gap between the very small and the large packers, and we're really missing that mid-scale regional processing facility. Similarly, we're also lacking mid-scale producers in this country. That sector, the ag in the middle, is really missing in the U.S. Sounds like, Josh, you're kind of moving into that mid-scale yourself, and when you hit that mid-scale, you need a processor who's also mid-scale, right? Who's going to take 1,000 hogs a year. That's not a 10-person plant anymore, right? But there's a real lack of that kind of category of processors. And so NPAN was encouraged to kind of offer more support to the mid-scale processor and more support around like business planning and financial analysis and financial benchmarking, So we were just included on a LFPP grant to actually help establish financial benchmarks for plants that are more in like the 10 employee to 100 employee range. And so we're excited to do that research over the next couple of years and really try to understand how to make those type of operations viable. So that's one area of work that we're doing. And then the other thing that came out was that, we do great work around processor education, but there needs to be more education to producers about how to market meat and how to work with their processor. And so we heard that message, and last year we launched something called the Western Meat School, which was a hybrid short course. It was both in person and online, catered towards the West, but we had people all over the country take it. And we actually had 650 people sign up for it. But that was really designed around how farmers it was focused on like the end of the life of the animal. So finishing the animal properly so that it grades well and is high quality meat. And then everything, all the processing logistics, we talked about cutting the animals. We had a couple video breakdowns of carcasses, and then how to select your market channels and do pricing. So that was very popular. And we turned that into an on-demand course, so it's available anytime now. And other states are wanting to collaborate with us to kind of bring it to the Midwest and the East Coast. It's not going to vary much, really. There's only one class about pasture finishing that's going to be different based on the different regions of the US, but otherwise all the rest of the content is similar on how farmers can direct market meat. So that's an area that we're really trying to beef up as well. Yeah.
Okay. How did, I know you mentioned scheduling already, but how did COVID shake things up, change the trajectories for the meat industry? And are there things not as important before COVID that are now very important, or the other way around?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, a couple of things happened. The large packers either had to close or they had to slow production because they had less employees, and they had to spread them out. So as a result, some of those animals were euthanized, unfortunately, because they got too large for the facilities. But some of them were shifted to mid-scale and small plants. I know even here in Oregon, there was an entrepreneur bringing truckloads of Iowa pigs out here, and he took up like every single slaughter slot in Oregon and Washington for a couple months because he was bringing in truckloads, and the processors were quite happy with that, But that what that did is that, the farms that usually brought their animals to those processors were pushed to the side, maybe because they were smaller and lower volume. So that was one part of the bottleneck. And then, consumer demand, especially the panic buying early on in the pandemic, where people were filling their freezers full of meat, caused more consumers to actually want to buy from local farmers and buy wholes, halves, and quarters and eighths and such. So that was also another big influx of volume to small and mid-scale processors too. So kind of those two things happen. And then, the small plants, while they didn't have the giant COVID outbreaks, they certainly had COVID, and they had sick employees, and they also had employees who didn't feel safe coming in or whatever. And so they weren't able to keep up with the demand. And as I was saying earlier, they couldn't access new labor either to increase their production. Like I know many plants who wanted to add a second shift or a Saturday shift, and they just couldn't find anyone willing to work those shifts. So it wasn't even an option for them. What was the second part of your question?
Oh, has there, let's see, is there any things that aren't as important before COVID, or the other way around as they are now?
Well, I do think, I think plants of all sizes are paying a lot more attention to providing better wages, benefits, sick time for their employees, and just trying to provide a healthier work environment. And I think overall that's a good thing. It's something that needed to happen to the industry, and this is a good shakeup for it to finally realize that their people matter. So that's one thing. But I also think a lot of processors decided to stop doing transactions, fee-for-service processing for the very small farmers. I call them the onesie-twosie farmers, anyone raising less than like 10 head a year. And I see that they are not bringing them back. They're just not interested in dealing with them because of the high transaction costs. And they'd rather have farmers who can bring in trailer loads. So I think that that's going to be an issue for the very small farmers and the beginning farmers who are just not to scale yet. And what I tell those type of farmers is, if you are that small, there's really no reason why you couldn't sell all your animals through custom exempt shares. There's no reason to be doing retail cuts of meat at that scale. And even to sell at the farmer's market, you're going to sell out so quickly that it's probably not worth your time. And it's not that hard to find 10 to 20 families to take your animals, and to fill up their freezers. So I just encourage the very small people to go that route. And there's more custom exempt slaughter operations in this country than there are inspected ones. So that's a workaround for the very small producers.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of interest in mobile processing units, including ourselves here in Minnesota. In the community colleges, we're looking at setting up educational programs. Can you talk about their strengths and challenges of the MPUs?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the startup costs are lower. MPU might be around $500,000, whereas a brick and mortar that kills a similar number of animals would be closer to $2 million, right? So lower startup costs. You don't have fixed assets, so even if you decide to get out of it, you can sell it. It's pretty simple, and I see people sell them all the time. It's easier to deal with wild type animals and bison and non-amenable species if you can actually go out to the farm. A lot of farmers don't handle their animals well, and so they can't even get them on a trailer. And so for those type of farmers that have either more limited handling skills or more wild type species that they're raising, like yak or bison, the MPUs work much better to do field harvesting. But the challenges generally outweigh the strengths, and that's why there's only around a dozen operating MPUs in the US that are under inspection. There's a few things that make them not cash flow very well. One is you need a commercial driver, and they generally get paid quite well, and they're generally not the same person as the slaughterman. Commercial drivers, you can't find a CDL operator is going to work for less than probably $35 an hour. Insurance is quite expensive, the road insurance. Most farms are not set up to dock an MPU, and they don't have handling infrastructure. They don't have a knockbox. They don't have a kill chute. They don't have any of that stuff. Maybe they don't have potable water. Maybe they don't have an approved septic system. Depends on where you're at, if they let you land apply the wastewater or not. So those are all issues. And they're not as efficient as a brick and mortar facility. So you can't kill as many animals in a day, which makes it generally more costly per head. But they work great in very isolated communities, island communities, the San Juan Islands of Washington, the Alaskan Islands, Hawaii. There's one on Martha's Vineyard. So for areas where it's really difficult to transport animals to a slaughterhouse, say they have to get on a ferry, it makes MPUs cost effective. Yeah, we'll see how it works out for you guys. You'll probably run into the same issues, but they work great for custom exempt slaughter. And You don't have as many issues around misstuns because there's no inspector watching you kill the animals. But misstuns are quite frequent with MPUs because most farms don't have a knockbox. And so that's another issue. Yeah.
Okay. Could you talk about the role universities and community colleges might have in building a skilled labor force for the industry and overcoming maybe those labor shortages?
Yeah, so there's a lot of new programs under development right now or launching at colleges and vocational schools. I'm in touch with a few of them, like the new one at Penn State, I think is designed really well. There's 4 months of hands-on training at the Penn State Meat Lab, where they learn everything from slaughter through further processing. And then they're placed in an externship for 2 years with a processor. And the state picks up the tab for their wages. And then they graduate by doing a final project, something in the plant that they sort of fix or improve in the facility, or they create a new product. So I think that's a pretty neat program. Central Wyoming College is launching one. There's one in Northern Montana. Madison Technical College has an artisanal butchery one. I don't think they teach slaughter, but I think they teach more of the butchery and further processing and charcuterie side of things. And then there's a lot of land grant universities that just do short courses as well. So that's another option, especially for people who are working and just can't take a year or two of their lives to go through a more intensive program. Like I know Iowa State and Penn State do a good job of doing like weekend short courses, where, you know, like Salami 101 or All About Sausage or, you know, stuff like that, where you just get a couple-day intensive. But what all of these programs struggle with is having a pipeline of students. And if they don't have a pipeline of students, the programs don't last. Like there was a program at SUNY Cobleskill for many years in upstate New York, and they just couldn't get enough students. And so they closed that program for about 5 years, and now they've brought it back. Like that Penn State program that just launched, they only had 6 students in their first class, and the Dr. Campbell, who's running that program, told me, like, if they don't get closer to 15 to 20 students, it's not going to pencil, and the university will probably shut it down. So I think we probably have to go further back to get a pipeline of students for these college level programs. I think we have to probably start in the high school. So there's one model that I like in particular in Missoula, Montana. Their high school there actually has a meat lab at the high school that they just built a couple years ago. I think it's FFA that runs it. And the kids are doing custom exempt processing in the meat lab at their high school, which is super cool. And they can serve that meat on the campus. They can't sell it, but they can serve it to other students. So that's, you know, if kids learn earlier, then maybe they'll actually consider meat processing and butchery as a vocation, and then maybe apply to some of these college level programs.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned before there's a lot of financial aid coming into the industry from the USDA. They announced their $500 million, and I think another, I'm not sure if it was another additional $100 million in loan guarantees. What kind of investments would be most helpful to the small and mid-sized plants?
Yeah, so first, the first thing that they offered this year was the MPIRG grants, the Meat and Poultry Inspection Readiness Grants, and that was about $55 million, I believe. And they're notifying awardees right now. There might be some people on this call who've been notified this week. And that money was designed for plants that are not yet under inspection to get under inspection. So either a custom exempt plant to come to state or federal inspection, or a state plant to get their federal inspection. So it was meant to increase the pipeline of inspected facilities so that farmers have more access to inspection for their meat. So that's being deployed right now, and we'll see you know, what the impacts of that are. I know 16 states last year directed CARES Act funding to small plants. I'm not sure if Minnesota did that. I think they did. And that was millions of dollars too. And a lot of plants decided to focus that money on equipment upgrades and also labor saving technology, which I think is probably a really wise use of these dollars. So the new money that the USDA is working on, and I've been in a lot of calls with them to help design these programs, is going to be a combination of grant programs, direct loans, and loan guarantees. So the grants will be on the smaller end, and they'll probably be more designed for things like feasibility studies or business plans for new startups. But they haven't said for sure if they'll also give out grants for actual facility upgrades or not, and capital costs. And then there'll be direct loans. I believe it's probably going to be through rural development. And then there's going to be loan guarantees, which means you can go to your traditional lenders or your rural farm credit, and USDA will back those loans. So the loans will be more for new construction and larger renovation projects and equipment upgrades. So, if anyone's on this call thinking about starting a new facility, I think you should spend the next few months, the last 90 days of this year, developing a feasibility study and a business plan, which you can do yourself. And there's templates on our website too, so that when these grant and loan programs get launched, which will probably be January, February, you're ready to apply, because USDA, if you are a startup and thinking about a new facility, they want to see that you've done your homework before they give you money, because they need to know that it's a viable business idea, right? So that's what I would spend my time doing right now. And if you're an existing operation, I would start getting bids on things, maybe have a consultant do a walkthrough of your plant to figure out what kind of upgrades you should be making, kind of strategic investments. And starting getting cost estimates on things, so that when these grant and loan programs launch, you're ready to apply. And on top of that, make sure you have a DUNS number, do that right away, and a SAM number.
Okay. What type of research and education outreach needs of farmers? What are some of the research and education and outreach needs of farmers and meat processors, and what kind of support can universities, particularly land grant universities, provide?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think more of the short courses, like I was mentioning, there's meat labs at almost every land grant in this country. A lot of them aren't really being used for a whole lot other than having a little retail butcher counter and some students making sausage, right? But I think more of them could be offering short courses to working professionals in the field, and great opportunity for processors to send their employees, to go learn about how to make charcuterie or ham or this or that. So I'd love to see more of that being offered. The land grants, especially out west, have really slacked on offering HACCP courses. So I'd love to see them get back in the HACCP game and offer HACCP courses. In-person HACCP is the best, because it's really hard to think about HACCP virtually. It's really nice to be in a facility and actually walk through the facility when you're designing your food safety plan. And let's see, I think, there's a dearth of livestock and poultry extensionists, but there's very few meat science or meat processing extension agents. And especially out west, we have almost none, probably because we have very few facilities, but would love to see more land grants put a little energy behind that, maybe just get one person for their state. NPAN really tries to be that for all 50 states, but it really helps to have somebody in each state who kind of knows the specifics of that state's regulations and stuff like that, like kind of a go-to person. And on our website, we do have a list of people, if you click on state help, we have a list of about 30 states that have kind of a point person in each state. A lot of them are extension agents that people can go to, but I'd love to have somebody in every state. And then I just think extension in general, extension agents in general, no offense to those who are on this call who are extension agents, but more training in business would be very helpful, because you can tell farmers all day long about overgrazing or improving water retention or soil carbon or this or that. But if they can't run a viable business, you know, the farm can't stay in operation. And so I'd love it if either all extension agents had more business training, or they had at least an ag business specialist in each state. Because I mean, like our Western Meat School, we had people from all 50 states sign up for this, and they all said, none of this kind of content is being offered in my state. The marketing of meat and market channel selection and branding and costs of production and pricing our meat products, like that kind of content is hard to come by. So that's why we're doing it. And we're happy to do it. But I think more states could do that as well.
I think before we have a lot of questions coming in from our attendees. So while we're still talking about the education and training and what can universities do piece, I think there's a question from Jeff Miller, and that's going to be probably related to something like this. I'm going to invite Jeff to come and ask your question. Jeff, are you still?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for this great information. My name is Jeff Miller. I'm the Dean of Instruction here at Ridgewater College, and I have some questions related to the education. There's another campus in Minnesota State that are, you know, kind of working on building a meat cutting program. And I think Dave at CLC and myself, our overall concern with this is, I mean, we can build anything. That's not our struggle. Our struggle is going to be finding students, right, to fill these. And you had mentioned that, you know, Penn State struggled to get enrollment. Can you provide us, based on what you know, the average incoming first year student numbers in a program based on your knowledge and what you know about these education programs around the country? Because theoretically, if Penn State can do this for 16 students and make it go, that would be incredible. I can't make a program cash flow or even break even. Honestly, for 24 students would be a struggle for me, especially early on for the high overhead.
Yeah.
So based on that, can you tell me what is the average on that? And then I have one additional question after you answer that.
Yeah, I can't really say what the average is across these different programs. But I know, like at OSU's meat science program in our meat lab, I asked the meat lab manager over the last 10 years, how many of the students that have gone through this program have ended up working in meat processing? And he said 1. He said all the rest go on to veterinary school. And that is super common at the land grant programs. The students working in the meat lab generally don't go on to work in the meat world. They generally go on to veterinary school. So that's not really creating a pipeline of people to work in this industry. So I don't know if, you know, your program will attract the same audience. But yeah, I think it depends on, you know, like Penn State Meat Lab has been around for a long time. And so they're not having to cover the operating costs of like a new facility or new pieces of equipment. It's been around for decades. But I could see if you're creating a brand new program, you're going to have really high overhead costs. And so that's where I think you have to look into these grant programs to cover the cost of the mobile slaughter unit and some equipment and stuff like that. But you can also think about fee-for-service processing as a way to cash flow your operation. Students don't always do the best job in fee-for-service processing, but maybe if it's custom exempt processing and people don't care as much because they're just paper wrapping it and sending it home in bulk, they won't care about the quality as much. But I think there's ways for these meat programs to make money and to also offer like short courses on the weekends or things that even consumers may want to come to, like a weekend pig butchery class or a poultry butchery class for non-students, for just regular cooks and home cooks and stuff like that. Have you thought about that as, a way to cash flow your program?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're always looking at ways that we can generate some revenue to help offset the cost of that through, whether that's, through selling the product or something like that. We ideally at Ridgewater, I can't speak to that other institution that's building a meat cutting program. There's somebody told me it's somewhere in the state, but we are looking to in lieu of maybe purchasing a mobile unit, we're looking at partnering with our local industry folks that can free up some space so we don't have the large overhead, because we weren't fortunate enough to be named in the grant that CLC was, and that's no slight to CLC. Good for you for raising money. We just have to do it a different way because we don't have. I don't have $1.5 million laying around to be able to do something like this. So we're going to partner with our local industry and see if we can't offset some of that high revenue cost, at least up front, to utilize a space that's already licensed and regulated and so our overhead will be low initially, hopefully, but long term, I mean, if we want to be viable in this space, we have to build a facility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, most processing facilities are not operating on the weekend because they don't want to pay overtime. So yeah, why not partner with existing facilities to use their space like on Saturdays? I think that's a great idea to get started and to just kind of pilot, take baby steps, like not build a $2 million facility and only have 5 students, but you can start off by using other space. And then maybe a few years into it, you'll get up to that 25 student number.
I'm going to switch gears on the conversation a little bit here. So the next question that we have coming up is from Paul Sobosinski.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Harshada. Rebecca, what is being done to invite the immigrant community into meat processing, also along with the business training that could lead eventually to ownership for them or some members of their community in your area or other areas in other states that you might be aware of?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. A couple things. We're offering a lot more of our resources and training in Spanish. I'm bilingual, so I also provide technical assistance in Spanish. And I have 2 consultants on our board who speak Spanish as well. One's a meat scientist from Mexico. So we help deploy those people, at least to the Spanish-speaking population. Also, I've been getting just a crazy number of folks wanting to start halal facilities over the last year. And so I've been helping them find halal slaughtermen and get get certified and approved by their local mosque for halal slaughter. I've been helping them find facilities to buy and fix up. I've been helping them figure out how to start up from scratch. That's, and also just comply with the regulations, understand the regulations. So that's something that we can help with. And then I think more generally, I would love to see some of these meat cutting programs being offered in other languages, even if it's just a short weekend intensive. I'd love to see more in Spanish, potentially Arabic, Hmong, and a couple other key languages. Obviously, not every program is going to be able to offer that, but really like hone in on their local immigrant population and figure out what language is most appropriate. I know that in North Carolina, NC Choices, which is part of the NC State program, they work with processors. They helped processors kind of onboard and train a lot of immigrants who were coming out of the large packing plants who no longer felt safe working in them anymore and didn't want to go back to work at Smithfield and the other giant packers. And so they helped kind of figure out employee training and onboarding for them. And so a lot of small plants were able to actually pull in immigrants from large facilities because they offer better working conditions and more safe conditions. So I think processors could do that all over the country, is try to kind of attract employees who are working maybe on an assembly line and are sick of it to actually come work in a small facility where they get to do everything. So yeah, great question. And I think that that's a really untapped pool of potential new skilled employees, because most of these people have skills in meat processing.
Thank you.
I want to invite all of you to keep adding questions in the chat box so I can reach out to call out to you, or you can use like the raise hand function here also. The next question is coming up from Teresa.
Honestly, I think one of them has been responded to dealing with halal kosher, because I know in Minnesota, we have a growing Muslim community and they are seeking halal grown meat and halal slaughtered meat. And at our annual conference in February, we're actually having a workshop on the halal growing side of things. So I just want to put that out there, that until the last year, I hadn't given a whole lot of thought to the raising of halal protein. I was more focused on the slaughtering, but to slaughter, you have to, ideally, you're raising your meat halal as well. Mm-hmm. And there is an effort to establish a halal meat raising certification program. There is a certification label in Iowa and Nebraska, and I believe Wisconsin. And in Minnesota, that effort's led by Serdar Momanyev. I'm saying his last name wrong, but he works for Extension out of St. Cloud. So I'm sharing that more than I am asking a question, but any advice you have, Rebecca, for how we proceed in Minnesota on both halal meat production and processing? You've kind of already addressed that.
Well, I think halal is perfectly suited for custom exempt slaughter. And so I often encourage folks, unless they want to create a wholesale business selling halal meat to grocery stores and stuff like that, it's much easier, a lot less hoops to jump through and lower costs to just establish a custom exempt farm where you are killing live animals on the farm for the customer who comes. And that's traditionally how Muslim customers like to shop for their animals anyway, because they want to pick out the live animal. They want to see it alive, and then you kill it for them. And that's perfectly compliant with custom exempt regulations. So that's generally the trajectory that I send people. But if they're dead set on wholesaling meat, then they're going to have to do it under inspection. And so and I say this pretty much to anyone, I encourage people to start by leasing a facility, maybe just focusing on the cut and wrap side of things first, lease an existing facility, maybe even just lease it 1 day a week, like on Saturdays or something, and build their business that way, and then get up to enough, millions of dollars of sales basically before they think about building their own facility.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a great discussion. I'm going to open the floor for a final question from Kristen VanDerPol before we wrap up.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So just a little backstory, but I'm working on a project for one of my classes about starting a butcher shop. And so I was just wondering if you could tell me what would be the most costly mistake you think new processors make, and just kind of how to avoid that. You had already mentioned they have a very small profit margin. So kind of how do you utilize that profit margin to the fullest extent?
Yeah. Are you talking about a cut and wrap facility, or are you talking about a retail butcher shop?
We're looking to do slaughter to retail, so everything.
Oh, okay. All right. So a fully inspected facility, right? Yeah. Or as they call it in Canada, an abattoir. So I think I think the biggest mistake that folks make is that they pull together all the capital for the construction costs through loans and through savings of their own and grants and other things, maybe equity investors, but they often forget that they need operating capital for the first 2 to 3 years before they're up to the volume numbers that they need to cash flow the operation. So when you're raising capital to build something, you also need to get operating capital for 2 to 3 years, because you will not come out the gate at hitting 100% volume targets to cover your operation. And then the other costly mistake is setting your processing fees, your kill fee and your processing fees based on what others are charging, not based on your actual costs of production. So as you're building your pro forma for your first 3 years of operation, and figuring out what your cost of operating is, that's what you do first before you then set your kill fee and your processing fee. It should be based on your actual costs of operating. And you need to build a profit margin in there. And it probably should be as generous as possible, because things will always come up. Equipment will always break. And then I think the third thing is that if you are not a welder and you are not good at repairing equipment yourself, you need to have probably someone on staff or someone in your back pocket to do equipment repair, and it's going to be constant. And I think most small plants don't even budget that as a labor cost, but it may even need to be an actual staff person, because you will be working on equipment, at least one person nonstop. That's about it.
Thank you for all these questions, and thank you for such a wonderful conversation. Am I missing on anything, Stu? Or
you're not. Just thank you so much. This has been invaluable, and I'm really excited to share this with more folks too. So thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Harshada, for planning this and pulling it together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess with that we'll end the webinar, but I can stick around if anybody wants to talk about anything for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and I will say that you can check our website, nichemeatprocessing.org. There's a little tab at the bottom that says schedule office hours. So if you actually want to have a one-on-one call with me and I have 30 minutes call slots, just pop your name in there and pick a time, and you can pick my brain even more. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. was really nice having you with us, Rebecca. And Josh, thank you for holding this conversation together.